My brother had to send his mother-in-law to the airport in an Uber after she tried to ruin his career. I don't know if I'm posting this in the right place, but I feel like I'm going to explode if I don't get this out. My family just went through something that feels like it was ripped from a soap opera, and I need an outside perspective because my head is spinning. It all starts with my brother, Bruno. He's not just my brother, he's my best friend, my rock. I've watched him literally build his life from nothing. He's a consultant, and for years I saw him pulling all-nighters, taking risks, and pouring every ounce of his soul into creating a business with a solid reputation. We live in Pochitos, a neighborhood in Montevideo where your name is everything. It's the kind of place where people talk, and Bruno had painstakingly built a name for himself as someone reliable, smart, and trustworthy. He was so proud of it, and I was so proud of him. Then there's his wife, my SL, Alejandra. She's a sweetheart, truly. She adores Bruno and is a genuinely kind person, but she is completely and utterly enmeshed with her mother. It's like her mom holds the remote control to her emotions. And that brings me to the main character of this nightmare, Graciela, my brother's Mel. On the surface, she's the perfect grandmotherly type. She brings homemade pasta to family dinners, remembers everyone's birthday, and has this soft, gentle smile. But her smile is the kind that hides a sharpened knife. Graciela operates under the deeply held delusion that any and all of her meddling is an act of profound love and protection for her daughter. She sees herself as a guardian, but she's really a saboteur. For years, our family gatherings have been this masterclass in passive aggression. Picture a Sunday barbecue, the smell of the grill in the air, everyone laughing, it all seems perfect. But then, there would be a lull in the conversation, and Graciela would turn to Bruno with that concerned, syrupy sweet voice. Brunito, dear, are you sure this consulting thing is stable? My friend's son just got a lovely secure job with the government. A real pension, you know. The air would instantly turn cold. Bruno's jaw would tighten just a fraction, but he wouldn't say a word. He'd just catch my eye from across the table, and we'd have a whole silent conversation. The look said it all. Here we go again. Just ignore it. Alejandra would immediately get flustered, her face flushing, as she'd jump in with a frantic, "Oh, Mom, let's not talk about work. Who wants another glass of wine?" And just like that, the moment would pass. We'd all take a collective breath and let it go. Every single time. We did it for Alejandra. We did it to keep the peace. That was our fragile normal, a carefully constructed illusion that we were all a happy, functioning family. We were just pretending, and we had no idea how badly it was all about to break. But looking back, the cracks were always there. That fragile normal was held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. Graciela's campaign against my brother's career wasn't a new thing. It was a slow, methodical war of attrition. To her, Bruno's success was a threat. His consulting business was unstable, not a real job. She'd say it with this pitying little head tilt, like he was a child playing pretend. Every family dinner, it was the same broken record. A man needs a secure government job, a pension, benefits. How can you protect my Alejandra with this hobby of yours? It was relentless. I remember one Christmas, she literally brought him a printout of a job listing for a bureaucratic position, wrapped with a bow. She handed it to him right after he opened his gift from Alejandra. The silence that fell over the room was so thick you could have choked on it. Bruno just smiled tightly, thanked her, and folded it up without looking at it. But I saw his hand tremble slightly as he put it on the side table. He was being humiliated in his own home, and he had to just take it. Worse, she'd work on my SEL behind the scenes. I once overheard them in the kitchen, her voice a low, concerned whisper. "Is he really making enough, mi vida? These freelancers, they can have a good month and then nothing. Are you putting money away just for yourself?" She was planting seeds of doubt, trying to poison Alejandra's trust in her own husband. The most insidious thing was how she'd spread her narrative around Pochitos. We'd run into neighbors at the market who'd ask Bruno, "So, still between things? I hear the government is hiring." He'd have to politely correct them, explaining that his business was actually thriving. But the damage was done. His own MIL was telling everyone he was a failure. And through all of this, Alejandra was the buffer, or maybe the enabler. Every time Bruno would get that tight, angry look on his face, she'd rush in to smooth things over. "Mama, please. You know how she is. She just worries because she loves me." It was her mantra. That sentence was the excuse for everything. It gave Graciela a free pass to undermine, criticize, and sabotage, all under the guise of maternal concern. Bruno was trapped. He knew that if he really went after Graciela, he'd be starting a war with his wife. Alejandra couldn't separate herself from her mother, so an attack on Graciela was an attack on her. He was trying to protect his marriage, but the cost was letting this woman slowly chip away at his spirit and his reputation. The pressure was building, and we all felt it. That peace was costing way, way too much. We just didn't know the final bill was about to come due. And then the bill came due. It happened on a Tuesday night. The three of us, me, Bruno, and Alejandra, were just finishing dinner. Graciela was staying in the guest room for the week, and the tension had been a constant, low-grade hum in the house. I remember the exact moment it happened, because Bruno's phone started vibrating on the table, a frantic, insistent buzz. He glanced at the screen, and his face immediately went tight. It was his biggest client, the one his entire business was practically built on. A call this late was never good news. He stepped into his office to take it, and Alejandra started nervously clearing the plates. I could hear his voice through the door, low and controlled at first, then rising with disbelief. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that? An email? What are you talking about?" When he came back into the dining room a few minutes later, all the color had drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't say anything, just walked over to his laptop, his hands shaking so badly he could barely type his password. I went and stood behind him, my heart pounding in my chest. He pulled up an email that had been forwarded to him by his client. The subject line was, "Formal concern regarding Bruno R's business practices." I felt my stomach drop to the floor. My eyes, they scanned the text, and the words felt like physical blows. It was a long, rambling message written in this faux corporate speak, full of accusations about unethical billing practices, potential financial mismanagement, and concerns about his lack of professional oversight. It was all baseless, insane garbage, but it was worded just carefully enough to sound plausible to an outsider. It was designed to plant a seed of pure poison. But that wasn't the worst part. My blood ran cold when I saw the CC list. She hadn't just sent it to his most important client. She had copied the entire neighborhood committee, Senora Diaz from across the street, who organized the annual festival, Senor Perez, the retired lawyer who everyone respected. In our small, tight-knit world of Pochitos, this wasn't just an attack on his business. It was a public execution. It was a deliberate, calculated move to destroy his reputation, to make him a pariah in his own community. Bruno just stared at the screen, utterly silent. The only sound was the clicking of the mouse as he scrolled up and down, reading it again and again as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he looked at the sender's details. The email was from a burner account, some generic, concerned neighbor address. But we both knew. There was only one person on this planet who hated his career that much. He stood up, his face a mask of cold fury, and walked into the living room where Alejandra was sitting with her mother. Graciela was knitting, a serene smile on her face. She looked up and said, "Everything all right, dear?" Bruno held up the laptop so she could see the screen. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you write this?" Alejandra looked confused, but Graciela didn't even flinch. She just set down her knitting needles, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "I did what I had to do." Alejandra gasped, "Mama, what is this? What did you do?" And then Graciela delivered the line that I will never, ever forget. She stood up, her face a performance of tearful, maternal anguish. "I did it to protect you, my baby," she cried, turning to Alejandra. This business of his is a fantasy. It was going to fail, and he was going to drag you down with him. I had to force his hand. I had to make him see that he needs a real, stable job to take care of my daughter." I just stood there, speechless. The delusion was breathtaking. In her mind, she hadn't just committed a malicious, career-destroying act of sabotage. She had performed a heroic act of love. She thought she was saving us. That was the moment I knew the peace was over. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war. I felt the pasta I'd just eaten turn to acid in my stomach. A wave of nausea washed over me so intensely I thought I was going to be sick right there on the dining room rug. I looked at my brother, and my heart just broke. All those years of work, all that passion and sacrifice, threatened by a single malicious email sent by a woman who was currently performing a one-act play of martyrdom in his living room. Bruno hadn't moved. He was just standing there, white-faced and completely still, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. He wasn't seeing any of us. He was watching his professional life burn down around him. Alejandra, my poor SEL, was a wreck. She was making this horrible, choked, sobbing sound, her hands fluttering near her mouth as if she could physically catch the words and stuff them back in. She kept looking from Bruno's stone-cold face to her mother's tear-streaked one, trapped in the no-man's land between the husband she loved and the mother she was conditioned to defend. I could see the war in her eyes. She knew this was monstrous, but condemning her mother felt like a betrayal she wasn't capable of. So she just stood there, shaking and crying, paralyzed by a lifetime of enmeshment. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with betrayal and shattered trust. And then Graciela, with the timing of a soap opera villain, wiped a single tear from her cheek, straightened her cardigan, and smiled a bright, dismissive smile as if the whole ugly scene was now over. She picked up her handbag from the armchair. "Well, that's all settled then," she said, her voice impossibly cheerful. She turned to Bruno, who still looked like a statue. "Brunito, dear, would you be a lamb and give me a ride to the airport? My flight is in 3 hours." I swear the earth stopped spinning on its axis for a second. We all just stared at her. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking disconnect from reality was staggering. She had just confessed to trying to professionally assassinate him, and she was now asking for a favor. But she wasn't done. She delivered the final blow with that same saccharine smile. "Since you're freelancing anyway," she added with a little pat on his arm, "you have the time." That was it. That was the spark that lit the fuse. The words hung in the air, so dense and dripping. With condescension, they felt like they had a physical weight. It was the ultimate insult, a final dismissal of his life's work. In that instant, something in both Bruno and me just snapped. The part of us that had spent years biting our tongues, exchanging knowing glances, and keeping the peace for Alejandra's sake. It didn't just break, it atomized. The peace treaty was over. Without a word, I pulled out my phone. My fingers moved with a weird, detached precision. I opened the Uber app. Destination, Carrasco International Airport. I confirmed the ride. "Your Uber is 8 minutes away," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone. Then I walked past all of them, went straight into the guest room where her suitcase lay open on the bed, and started packing. I folded her sweaters, gathered her toiletries from the bathroom, and zipped the whole thing shut with a firm, final tug. There was no anger in my movements, just cold, hard purpose. This woman was a threat, an infection in our lives, and we were cutting her out. When I wheeled the suitcase back into the living room, Bruno was already on his phone. He had turned his back on his wife and his mother-in-law. His voice was low and steady, and I heard him say, "Yes, I need to speak to a legal advisor about a case of libel and intentional interference with business." He was done. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. We weren't a family trying to work through a problem anymore. We were two people protecting what was ours, and the war had just begun. The moment Alejandra saw me wheeling the suitcase out, she completely lost it. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't do this! That's my mother!" She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Please, just stop. Don't make a scene. We can talk about this. We can fix this." I just looked at her, my heart aching for her, but my resolve like iron. "No, we can't." I said, my voice low. There's nothing to fix. Graciela, seeing her daughter's distress, launched into her next performance. The Uber notification pinged on my phone. Your driver is arriving now. And the sound seemed to trigger a fresh wave of crocodile tears. You're kicking me out? She wailed, clutching her chest dramatically. After everything I've done for this family, I was only trying to protect my baby. She looked at Bruno, her eyes pleading. I was protecting her from your unstable life. Bruno didn't even look at her. He was back at his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's cold light. He was typing with a frightening intensity. I need proof for my client, he said, more to himself than to us. I need to show them this was a targeted, malicious attack from a known source. And then he did something I never would have thought of. He logged into our home Wi-Fi router's admin panel. My blood went cold. He started digging through the connection, logs, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only sounds in the room were Alejandra's choked sobs, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the furious clicking of Bruno's keyboard. And then he stopped. He just froze, his hand hovering over the mouse. Oh my God, he whispered. He pointed at the screen. Look. I leaned over his shoulder, and what I saw made the nausea come back with a vengeance. It was a list of outgoing connections from Graciela's tablet, which she'd brought with her. There were timestamps, dates stretching back over the last year, whenever she had visited and connected to our Wi-Fi. And next to those timestamps were records of her accessing anonymous email services. He cross-referenced the dates with his own records. An email to a smaller client in March, questioning his project management skills. A tip to a potential partner in July, hinting at financial instability. This wasn't a one-time desperate act. This was a campaign. A slow, methodical, calculated war of sabotage she had been waging against him for at least a year. She had been smiling at our dinner table, hugging him goodbye, all while secretly trying to burn his entire life to the ground from inside his own house. The doorbell rang. The Uber was here. Graciela stood up, smoothing her skirt. She actually looked relieved, as if she expected us to come to our senses at the last second and beg her to stay. She walked to the lobby, her suitcase standing beside her, a portrait of a wronged matriarch waiting for her apology. But Bruno just calmly walked to his printer. He picked up 2 sheets of paper, folded them neatly, and walked over to her. He wasn't angry anymore. He was something far scarier. He was completely, utterly done. He handed her the papers. The first, he said, his voice flat and empty, is a cease and desist letter drafted by a legal firm. It states that any further contact with me, my business, or my clients will be met with legal action. Graciela's smug expression faltered. The second, he continued, is a list of personal boundaries. You are not to contact me or my sister. Any attempt to interfere in our lives will result in a permanent no-contact order. That means no visits, no calls, no letters. And if Alejandra and I ever have children, you will not receive so much as a photograph. The color drained from her face. The threat about future grandchildren landed like a physical blow. Bruno didn't wait for a response. He opened the front. Dower looked at the driver and said, "She's ready." Then he turned his back on her, walked back to his office, and shut the door. He left me standing there with a stunned Alejandra, whose sobs had finally gone silent. I turned the laptop screen towards her, my finger pointing to the damning list of dates and times. I didn't have to say a word. I just watched her face crumble as she finally saw the truth of who her mother really was. The front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. The low rumble of the Uber's engine faded down the street, and then there was nothing. For a moment, the 3 of us just stood there in the aftermath, breathing in the quiet. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins, making my hands steady and my mind sharp, drained away all at once, leaving me feeling hollowed out and shaky. It was like the world had gone from screaming technicolor to a dull, heavy gray. I looked over at Alejandra. She was still standing, where I'd left her, staring at the laptop screen. Her face was blank. All the tears cried out of her. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped, the cracks showing all over her smooth surface. And in that moment, the full weight of what we had just done crashed down on me. We served my brother's mother-in-law a cease and desist letter. We packed her bag and put her in an Uber like she was a piece of trash being taken out. Who does that? It feels like a story you'd read on AETA, not something that happens in your own living room on a Tuesday night. A part of me, the part that had been programmed for years to keep the peace, started screaming in my head. Did we go too far? Was there another way? Was it too cruel? I felt a sharp, painful pang of guilt. We had set out to protect Bruno, to draw a line in the sand, but in doing so, we had detonated a bomb in the middle of Alejandra's life. We had shattered her world. This was the confrontation she had spent her entire existence avoiding, and we had dragged her to it, kicking and screaming. I watched her slowly lift her head from the screen, her eyes finding mine. There was no anger in them, just a profound, bottomless well of pain. And I felt like an absolute monster. We'd forced her to see a truth about her mother that she wasn't ready for, maybe would never have been ready for. We'd made her an accessory to her own mother's exile. But then, as the wave of doubt threatened to drown me, I caught a glimpse of Bruno. He had come out of his office and was just standing there, watching his wife. The hard, steel-like resolve was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. He looked at me, and his eyes held the answer to my question. He saw my doubt, and he just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. And I remembered. I remembered the cold dread on his face when he first read that email. I remembered the CC list, a public shaming designed to humiliate and destroy him. I remembered the router logs, the cold, hard proof that this wasn't a moment of madness, but a long, calculated campaign of sabotage. This wasn't about a mother's misguided love. Love doesn't try to systematically dismantle your spouse's livelihood. Love doesn't lie to your face while plotting your downfall behind your back. What Graciela did wasn't love. It was control with a pretty bow tied on top. It was an attempt to break my brother's spirit so she could remold his life into something that made her feel secure. Our response, as harsh and cinematic as it felt, wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of survival. It was the only language she would ever understand. It was ugly and it hurt. But sometimes, when a part of your life is this toxic, you don't negotiate with it. You cut it out. It's been a few weeks now. The dust is starting to settle, but the landscape of our family is permanently changed. The first few days were a blur of damage control. Bruno managed to get his main client on a video call. He walked him through everything: the router logs, the history of Graciela's concerns, the whole ugly story. He was terrified, but he laid it all out. And to our immense relief, the client was horrified on his behalf. He apologized profusely for even questioning him and assured him their contract was rock solid. Bruno's business is safe. For the first time in a long time, I saw him take a full, deep breath, like he'd been holding it for years. As for Graciela, she apparently got to the airport and immediately started a phone campaign, calling every relative she could think of to cry about how her cruel son-in-law had thrown her out on the street. But her plan backfired. A few of our cousins called me, confused, and I just told them the truth, sending them a screenshot of the email she'd sent. The story spread like wildfire. No one took her side. She wanted to be a martyr, but she ended up just being a pariah. The biggest change, though, has been in Alejandra. After a week of almost complete silence, where she just moved through the house like a ghost, she came into the living room one night and announced she'd made an appointment with a therapist. Bruno and I were stunned. Then she told us she had done something else. She had blocked her mother's number. Not forever, she said. Just for a month. She needed a month of quiet to think, without her mother's voice in her head. It was the first real boundary I have ever seen her set in her entire life. It was a tiny step, but it felt like an earthquake. So now we have a new normal. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's not the tense, holding your breath silence we used to have when Graciela was around. It's a peaceful silence. The constant low-grade stress that used to hum in the background is just gone. But there's a scar. You can feel it. There's a fragility to everything, especially between Bruno and Alejandra. They're being so gentle with each other, like they're navigating a new relationship. He's giving her space, and she's slowly, tentatively learning to stand on her own 2 feet without her mother as a crutch. It's hopeful, but it's also painful to watch. And that's where I'm stuck. We did what we had to do. We protected my brother, his career, and their future from a woman who was actively trying to sabotage it all from the inside. But the methods we used were brutal. We didn't just have a talk. We brought in lawyers and Ubers and ultimatums. It worked, but it caused a huge rift and deeply hurt my sister-in-law, even if it's ultimately forcing her toward a healthier place. So, Reddit, I need to know. AITA for taking it to that extreme?